Tika tini aitua te tariki tua ki ka rimura ki te kōkua kākati akara nei ki raki a tea nā mate haere tūra. Ta mana wa whenua whakamawana te ihi tuwehi ta mana mata tapu o te puna i konei mo reira tina kōtū. I raura ka tira te hakoro hakuia mā tina kūtū tina tata kāpua. Wow, I was just listening to that introduction, I think, hell, is that me? And I sort of think back that over the years you kind of live lifetimes within lifetimes, and what was read out towards the end there was something that we actually penned back in the late 1980s, I think, and I'm thinking it's kind of pretty relevant still today. I'm kawanunu ki Wairarapa, but also strongly kura koutou i Ngāti Māmoe rapu pai ki tai Hāwea ki Uta. And my son is called TeHoripoKaraitiana, and so was his grandfather, and so was his grandfather. And they were, Ihakara and his brother came down from Wairarapa, and they got to know the people at North Canterbury at Tuihui through the kotahitanga meetings that happened up at Papua. So there were some arranged marriages made, of which my great-grandfather and great-grandmother were one of those arranged marriages. My Taurumpoa, so they were in another arranged marriage, and these arranged marriages happen not only around whakapapa, but also, of course, around land and traditional assets. So my Taurumpoa were also in an arranged marriage, and my taua is a whaoa or a karatai from deep in the south, and my daughter is named Hiniariki Aio, who hung around with Rā Te Kaihautū, who came across, we say, on the Uruā waka, and left some traditions that are pretty important to us in Te Waka o Aoraki. And our karatai line is one of those old lines, and as one of my aunties always said to us, in that line we were always there, we didn't come across on a waka. So I guess the first thing I'd like to do is just reflect on, it was my dad's birthday a couple of weeks ago, and he's passed on for a while now. And we used to travel with Dad all the time, not only to land meetings, but also to travel the island in the south. So as we become older, we'd always be following the cycles of nature down there. So when it was time to go and get the migratory tuna at our lake Waihora, we were over there getting the tuna. And that then sort of led up to the mutton bird season, so we'd trip off down to Pu'u, which is one of the southernmost islands from the big island from Rakiura. And it doesn't have any rats or pests on it because it's so remote, and we'd go mutton birding. And Dad was a shearer and a fisherman, and he just taught us, you know, the sound of the land and the seasonality of everything, and how that impact on us as a whānau in particular. And pre-European, we were pretty much still migratory people in the south. We'd follow the kai trails, and much of my whānau still follow those old trails that exist in the south today. So I guess this slide is just an introductory slide, and it kind of just means we are who we are, and we should be who we are in everything we do. So I've travelled a lot internationally, spent a lot of time up in China. In fact, I was looking at the Antipodes water that's here. We used to sell Antipodes water, David Truebridge furniture, and his son just won the deep dive sort of record this morning, and Manu Kahani and health products up in Shanghai. So we had a retail shop up in Shanghai, and our family operated this shop in Shanghai. It was just amazing to see the Chinese in particular's reaction to not only Aotearoa New Zealand, but also to the goods that we produce. So we could knock off these jars of honey for over 100 New Zealand bucks up there. And then Pacifica skincare range, Antipodes water. So whatever New Zealand was producing, the Chinese, particularly those in Shanghai and in those middle class sort of brackets, were buying. And overseas, we're different, we are who we are, and if we're comfortable with who we are, there's definitely an advantage, not only in terms of building relationships, but also building trade. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. I guess the cool thing about here and now is we've been in this space before, and it hasn't taken us long to kind of be back here. So we had a bit of a road bump when we had the advent of our European ancestors sort of hit this land, but this is a familiar place to us, and that's what excites me. So we're looking again out on the global stage with the strength of being who we are and doing what we do as we are, and it's quite exciting. Now, I guess this slide here, all I really want to illustrate with this one is there's parallel levels of development, not only with treaty settlements, and they seem to be full steam ahead at the moment, but the Māori freehold land corpus has come along in leaps and bounds, and there's some phenomenal advancements, opportunities, but a lot of potential still to go around that. I guess the Māori economy, you hear kind of all sorts of different figures. I guess the key thing is there's, from all these sort of graphs of things, there's still potential for uplift in terms of what we do in our land, in terms of activities, and to be able to provide a living for our families and for our communities. So people say it's kind of around that $2.3-ish billion. Of the Māori freehold land, if you really break it down into the engine room, there's kind of 621,000 hectares that's in mixed livestock, around 261,000 hectares that's in forestry on Māori freehold land, and then you've got dairy, horticulture, and a little bit of arable. Land class, as you can see, there's quite varying land class, but there's opportunities particularly around land use based on land class. Now, 90% of the area of Māori land is actually governed by around 363 trusts and corporations. So there's actually quite a small number of us, and many of you in the room, that are responsible for around 90% of that freehold land corpus. So this fallacy that Māori land isn't governed is not quite true. Most of it actually is. But the issue is around how do we get on a capability and capacity building sort of journey with those that are responsible for overseeing and governing Māori land. There's a lot of figures being chucked around our presence. Personally, I think I definitely know the dairy is a little bit lighter than 10%. Talking to the kiwi fruit guys the other day, to Zespri, we say it's around 10%, it's probably a little bit lighter than that. Forestry is probably about right. Sheep and beef, because the overall national footprint has been decreasing and we've been maintaining and building our position, 12% is about right. 30% of the land production, which is pretty cool. And of course, based on quota ownership, over 38% of fishing quota and a big chunk more of the fishing industry. I guess the key thing when I talk to people here and offshore is not only do we have a sizable presence across primary industries, we also have a long-term view, and strategically we're actually increasing our presence in all of those sectors. Māori export and trade, there's a bit of a fallacy as to how much we actually export. We're not big exporters, and we have pretty narrow categories that we actually export. So basically fish, and the only multi-category exporter that's been around a while is Wakatin Corporation. And the new star on the block, I guess, is Miraka Limited, which in year 2 kind of cracked it up to about over $200 million of exports and became the second largest Māori exporter behind the Sealord AFL group. And so we're pretty young, I guess, in terms of value chain, in terms of what we're doing. But, we've all heard this before. This is a room for people that this is common knowledge too. The key characteristics of things like ultra long-term, sustainable business models. We often have interests in multiple sectors. For example, Mangatoa Papamoa Corporation over in Tauranga Moana, kiwi fruit, avocados, commercial property development, rest home development, and of course Papakāinga development. So they're quite diversified, for example. Our operational performance is our source of wealth generation. Because we're not going to sell most of these assets, we've got to make them work to earn cash and then move into value chains, and that's really where the wealth generation will be for our people. And of course the distribution is becoming more of a challenge as we get more shareholders in our corporations and beneficiaries in our trusts. So how do we distribute a tangible benefit to our family and communities is becoming a bigger issue. So there are a number of, I guess the key message on this slide here is strategy before structure. There's a whole lot of sort of organisational constructs we can do to achieve what we want to achieve. For example, Mining Corporation, we've done most of what we've done in terms of building a $250 million asset base and associated businesses through our incorporation. So we've found that's quite a nice organisational structure. But as I mentioned, the key point around that slide are, Māori business from collective asset bases looks quite different in terms of structure these days. There's already large-scale clusters that exist, and if you're a small landholding block, it pays just to connect with other groups that are kind of doing or aspiring to do similar things. So you've got, Miraka was formed effectively by the Awhina group. I see wheel match here somewhere, or did you go to the other workshop? So TeHoripoKaraitiana and WMI took a little bit of a lead, but ultimately it was born from the Awhina group in the Central North Island. And then you've got iwi collective partnership around seafood assets in particular. TeHoripoKaraitiana, who I'm proud to have just started as the general manager recently, is effectively a collective of Tauranga Moana trusts who have predominantly horticultural interests. TAPS over here is pretty strong and vibrant, as I understand. So you can see there's a lot of cluster type of organisations to connect to if you're not already connected to it. And similarly, national organisations, so we've got Te TeHoripoKaraitiana, the old Māori trustee, and that's had a bit of an overhaul with Jamie Tuta as the Māori trustee. But I remember when I was working in the Māori Land Court way back in the 80s, there was a Māori Affairs Māori trustee development down in the Auckland Island, right in Western Southland, sheep and beef, and it wasn't sheep and beef country. We went down there with the bigwigs from Wellington at the time to have a look at it, and someone had just nicked all the stock off the place, and it was just bare and it was reverting back to scrub. So that was a bit of a disaster. So we've been in various guises on a land development pathway over the last few decades, and Te TeHoripoKaraitiana still obviously has an important role to play given its footprint. You've got FOMA, and many of you are members of FOMA, and they've got some pretty cool stuff going. For example, in sheep and beef productivity, the initiative that they've done across the country with agri-networks around increasing economic farm surplus per hectare in sheep and beef is kind of spoken for itself in terms of the outcomes there, as an example. One of the real standout events, but also a great framework behind it, is the Ahu Whenua Trophy, Māori Excellence in Farming. And if you want a blueprint in which to conduct your business, the assessment criteria and framework behind Ahu Whenua is pretty impressive. So not only about making money, but how you contribute to the community, the environment, and what does your business look like through your cultural lens, and how is that actually happening in action on the ground and within the communities. I guess just switching to people. Just under 500,000 people work in the primary industries, and primary industries have a real problem of attracting people into the industry and retaining them. We're pretty happy with how we get Māori into the industry, but year two, most of them actually leave. This is in the dairy industry.